Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club to talk to Sam Caucci, who is the CEO and the founder of 1HUDDLE, an innovative learning company. Sam, tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea, because what you guys do are sort of on the cutting edge of learning, getting away from rote learning, looking at generational, millennial learning challenges, right, where some people are very technologically savvy, but don't necessarily want to do that human interaction that older generations, is how older generations did business. Talk to us about how what came together to help you found the company, to sort of drive you to found the company in 2015.
Yeah, so Vago, I think I realized the workforce is changing pretty dramatically today. We've never had 5 different generations at work at the same time. At the same time, as a business owner, constantly facing the challenge of hiring young people right out of college, felt it was getting harder and harder to get people sort of ready for work. And companies not being able to respond fast enough to changing skill gaps led me to sort of explore, how do we use technology at a time when tech is sort of automating people out of work? How do we use technology to empower people that are on the job? And that led me in the direction of what would be the right product, which led me in the direction of games being a really powerful way to skill people up faster.
One of the stories that you mentioned was that you were in your umpteenth training session. Tell us like the moment where you were like, oh my God, this is really a waste of time and we got to find a better way to build this mousetrap.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of folks can relate to being in all-day trainings and workshops and seminars. And I ran sales and service teams who, quarter after quarter, HR or our organization would bring in some outside speaker or motivational person to talk to our team. And, we just got tired of sitting through the all-day workshops, knowing that when people came out of the workshop, within, hours or days, everybody went back to doing the same old stuff. So I kind of looked at training doesn't work if you don't remember what you learned. So how do we make sure that the stuff that we're teaching is sticking so that people can put it into work right away?
So one of the things that you guys as a company talk about, the sort of the empowering and the importance of work, and how, because people really do relate. It's their passion. Oftentimes, if they're lucky, it's their passion. It may not be their passion, but that's how they identify, for example, as groups and circles of friends. Talk to us about how you guys are harnessing technology to make work more rewarding ultimately. Like, what is it you guys are doing differently that others perhaps are not?
Yeah, so there's a lot of technology companies, and there's a lot of companies that have popped up that are doing learning and training and development, and they've been doing it the same way for a long time. I think the fact that we're at record low unemployment, the fact that we still have a skill gap, is signs that what we've been doing is not working. It's not effective. And simultaneously, if you might know how to do your job, but if you don't want to do your job, that's a big problem for companies today who are fighting to keep the talent that they're spending so much to recruit. So, a third of an employee's time on the clock is spent doing things other than work while at work, which means that if a company wants to be a leading organization, or, and this, I say company, but any entity that has people that have to stay on message and perform a task every day, you have to make sure your employees are excited about work. For us, we use games to, on one hand, get people skilled up faster. On the other hand, create an environment where employees compete against each other in a friendly manner, while at the same time, if you know your coworker on a certain level and you look forward to coming and interacting at work, you're probably going to stay on the job and perform better longer term.
And talk to us a little bit about the kinds of games you guys play, right? That do that team building, do that interpersonal, the personal growth part of it, as well as the skills improvement, because that's, you're really trying to do 3 or more objectives at the same time.
Yeah, so we have different types of training topics. They fall into a few buckets. We do brand training for organizations, which means you get hired on day one, you need to know a heck of a lot about a lot of stuff for the job. The second bucket is skill training, so performing the task every day. The third bucket would be like product training. We have also done a tremendous amount of work recently in what we call serious content. We call it our serious games bucket, where we're not just talking about heavy HR topics like diversity or harassment training, but even serious games on things like fire safety, active shooter, emergency evacuation. We work with a number of airports who have a lot of serious training that people on the ground have to know every day, and they struggle to get people in front of or on the clock for training, or they struggle to deploy it. especially with a workforce that's more mobile than ever, in a workforce that's hyper-connected and they're all over the place mentally. How do you keep people focused in so that what they're learning is sticking in effect? So after you log in, you get a series of questions that spin up depending on what the topic is. So in this training, I have to get as many points as fast as I can. Question pops up, a timer starts. I am guessing to unlock the answer. And what we're learning is that through struggle, content is retained better over time.
And so this was an interesting thing, right? That learning has been made too easy in some respects, hasn't it?
Correct. So the way that we've learned for, again, not the last 10 years, but for a heck of a lot longer than that, is through struggle. Struggle is a critical ingredient to the learning process. And what we're doing is we're using a game to disguise this test format. So as you play, your goal is really for me to just beat you on the leaderboard.
Right.
While in the process, the only way for me to unlock points to do that is to get the answers correct. So we're disguising the actual action. We joke all the time. Employees that have been through a ton of training and a ton of curriculum and a ton of education are not traditionally excited about taking a test.
Right.
Not like, think about the words we use: test and quiz and assessment and module and course. You know, the average American today is carrying a pretty high debt burden from their college loans. So the last thing we want to do when they get a job or they're performing a skill or a task is to overwhelm them with this type of academic jargon. So games lend the opportunity for us to disguise all of this, while at the same time the struggle you go through in a game to unlock new levels. To again, there's no other format, there's no other example out there where people play games that they fail at constantly and they keep coming back for more. I mean, I think that today when we have young people who haven't failed enough in socially, at school, and in work and in life, using games as a way to get them skilled up faster, get them those missing experiences, is a huge opportunity.
And also, guessing is something that is a positive. There are folks who say, "Oh, like guessing is wasting your time," but it's not.
It's like immersion. I mean, how do you learn a foreign language? The most powerful way to do it is not to read the book off the shelf. It's to immerse yourself in the content and struggle through it. It's just like the way an athlete prepares for a sport. When they practice and they go to the gym, if you put the same weight on the bar over and over again, eventually what happens? You don't get any better. So we're big believers, and the research proves it. The most effective way to learn is with struggle being constantly there. You have to put more weight on the bar if you want people to get better.
So tell us about some of the specific games, right? So that's what you're trying to accomplish. What does your curriculum look like? I know that it changes for each and every one. You have a lot of sports franchises, for example, but a vast series of major, certainly Fortune 500 companies. Talk to us a little bit about what this gameplay is like.
So one of the things that we found is that one of the most powerful game formats that people understand and interact with is trivia. So we disguise learning and training in the form of a trivia game. So players log on to our platform. When they log on, they compete against other coworkers on games on different topics. So think of a game like a chapter in a book or a module. So you have, we work across a dozen different verticals. So we have retail, we have restaurants, we have airports, we have safety teams at arenas and stadiums and venues all across the country. They have training topics that they have to know that relate to what their brand is, what the tasks they perform every day are, and general face-to-face communication, which I'm sure we could both agree that today more than ever, face-to-face communication, direct communication on different topics is something that a lot of companies are saying they're struggling with, especially at a time when we have a workforce that's more millennial. And now we're talking a lot about Generation Z, if you're tired of the M word by now.
That's very funny, actually. Tell us a little bit about, you said the interpersonal skills is a very, very important piece of this. What are some of the other key skill sets? When customers come to you, what are the, where are these skills gaps? Where does everybody need to do better that you guys are focusing on helping them with?
So I think if you were to pick a specific topic area, it'd be interpersonal communication is a big challenge. Soft skills are something that we hear from leaders across all types of organizations, that they struggle to get employees to understand how to communicate, how to handle difficult conversations. I mean, if you really think about it, the fact that we have a millennial workforce that prefers to text over calling, and now a Generation Z workforce, which 55% of our workforce by 2020 will make up those two generations. This is a group that has missed out. They've almost been robbed of so much face-to-face communication, interpersonal communication time because of technology. Since I text you instead of talking to you, I just have had less practice at that skill, which means we have to leverage technology to close that gap faster. So we're seeing major challenges that leaders are saying it's hard to upskill my people on things like how do we talk to a customer? How do we handle a difficult conversation? How do we put how do we give direct feedback that's sometimes difficult to somebody who's sitting next to us or somebody who's on our team? So that's the majority of what we hear a lot in the market today. I would say the other category would be changing content. What I mean by that is work is changing so fast today. Depending on who you talk to, the robots are either going to take all of our jobs or they're going to take some of them over the next 10 years. As that happens, we need to invest in technology that sits at the intersection of the interaction between a customer and an employee, or the employee and whatever tasks they're performing, so that when we build new training, new learning, we can do it faster, because the workforce doesn't have time to wait for me or you to build a PowerPoint deck about it.
Right. Well, tell us how, because one of the things also that drove you was there's got to be a better way to learn, right? Mm-hmm. So in starting the new business, you also studied how people learn, and how learning is fundamentally also changing because of the advent of technologies like this. Once upon a time, I like sometimes watching on YouTube World War II training films, and even though they're very, very stilted, you watch it and they've boiled it down so that by the time you watch that 20-minute video on how to start an airplane, you actually walk away and you go, wow, that was so clearly illustrated. I sort of got it, right? You could realize how some of those were very powerful. How are people changing how they learn? Talk to us about the technological, just talk to us about how learning is changing and what's sort of the cutting edge there, because then I want to take the conversation to the military and how actually some of the things you guys are doing, we're not trying to make a marketing video here for Sam, but how what you're doing is also applicable to a military audience, which has sort of an insatiable learning need, because every year there are tens of thousands of people who are coming in. You've got to train them up. You have attrition, but then you also want to continue that learning journey over your entire career. As the Chief of Naval Operations says, this ever faster learning force. So tell us, how is learning changing? How do you apply this to the military?
Yeah, so I think we've learned a very specific way for a very long time. I think it's really easy. Some people think that, all of a sudden, because we have mobile phones, we all of a sudden learn a different way. We learn through struggle. Struggle is a critical ingredient in the learning process. And I think you take a lot from the military, and even using sports examples as well, that we learn better when it's difficult and we fail through experiences. It's why simulators work. It's why, I would never get on a plane with a fighter pilot that just read the manual and that was it. But somewhere along the lines, we let HR take over control. And when they did, PowerPoint came out and we decided to build training in this very academic fashion. So most learning and training and education happens in this very sit through the workshop, read the manual, take the test. I don't know about you, but I sat through my fair share of classes that I crammed for the test on the last day, and then 2 days later I forgot everything. So I think it's proof that content sticks in a very certain way, and organizations in some cases have gotten lazy with the way that they educate, train, and develop. But I think if we looked at this concept of struggle being critical to learning, which is what I came upon when I was doing my research, I decided to build a product around making training harder, making the learning process more difficult as you pursue learning the information, because once you know it, you'll forget it at a slower rate. And learning is all about how slowly or how fast you forget something. If I know it over for a long amount of time, it has to do with the way that I learned it in the first place. So struggle was really key for us.
And how are you applicable to the military, right? Each of the military services is trying to figure out how we can get the most out of our training. How do we do better? How can you, because given most of your client base now is commercial, what are some ways that the military can benefit from these novel new training techniques or approaches that go beyond, for example, interpersonal communication? Because in the military you have a lot of people who are directly communicating with you in order to get you to do things. But the flip side of it is, on that skills basis, there is a lot to learn, and often it's very rote, and folks are looking to change that and to try to improve it.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking to a few branches right now. There's a ton of application for what we're doing within the military, and I think that it's a great environment because the military employs hundreds of game designers already for missions. And you talk about building simulators and simulations for different missions that are being conducted. So the understanding of how powerful a game is already exists. I think where we can get better is finding ways to use those same principles off the battlefield, where you talk about, like, we're doing a lot of work with veterans who are trying to get reacclimated to the workplace. How do we skill them up faster because they don't have the luxury of time when they come back and they're going through the interview process to understand, how do I build a resume? How do I conduct myself in an interview? How do I make sure I have the skills for today's workforce? So that's, I think, one way is that when we think about there's a ton of different environments where games can be used to skill people up quicker. Another example would be the fact that we have to understand that we have a workforce today that has the fraction of the talk time. So it goes just as far as saying is we have veterans who are coming in who have a fraction of the talk time or face-to-face communication that past generations have. If we want our soldiers to be effective, I want people to be effective on the job, we need to make sure that we're using tools to connect with them and skill them up quicker. So using games as a way of connecting with what my mission is. And again, broader mission, why am I here? Understanding how do I communicate with people around me. I think there's a ton of application for that to make sure that our soldiers are successful in all corners of their duty.
And you guys are 3 years old. You're based in my hometown in Manhattan, actually, in downtown Manhattan, although you have a facility in Newark as well. You're more than 30 people now, which is congratulations. Where do you guys want to be in another 5 years?
Yeah, so we see that the way that companies are, the organizations we're working with, the way that they are preparing people for work is very backward. I think that one of the things I've learned in the last 3 years is how slow the human resource space technology is being adopted by this corner of organizations. So the next 5 to 10 years, I see us being in a position where, as work changes, we're positioning our brand to be on the front line with the worker. I see a world where today organizations have folks in corner offices building training and learning and best practices and kind of pushing them all the way down the org and hoping they get to the right people. Tomorrow, using 1HUDDLE and technologies like ours, the ones that are going to win are the ones that are going to listen to the worker that's on the front line because they're the one that's seeing what's changing about work first. So you think about like Uber. You think about technologies that crowdsource underutilized assets in our workforce or in our economy. We see every worker that's walking the streets as a huge channel for best practices and information that can flow up as long as we can open up the channel for them to do that.
And one last question, right? Talk to us about the interface between, we've talked about automation and the challenge that's going to be societally, right, writ large. Once you have more automated cars, we actually become a liability as non-automated drivers in that ecosystem. It changes parking garages. I mean, like fundamentally, almost everything starts to change at that point, especially automobiles as a service, which is being reflected in, folks are using Ubers more, so they're not buying as many new cars, which is changing that dynamic. Talk to us about what that man-machine interface needs to look like, because you said something very important. You have to learn from that frontline person who's on the leading edge of learning and employment change. How do we need to think about how humans and AI and automated systems will all interact with each other in this future workplace?
I talked to a business owner the other day who has a tech company based in Silicon Valley who came out with a device that can make 243 custom hamburgers from scratch per hour. Meaning you walk up, pick, I want ground chuck, I want it medium rare, this is what I want on it, and in an hour it can make 243 of those custom. And in conversation asked, how is this going to support the worker? And you know what the answer was? It's not. It's going to replace them. So I think the reality is there's a lot of technology coming out that, let's not fool ourselves, are intended to replace workers, not just support them like a lot of press is coming out that it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay if we continue to sit back and watch. There's a massive amount of technology and dollars that are going into this effort, Silicon Valley, in New York, all over the globe. So not to put a positive spin on that. What it means is we have to change. We have to evolve. We have to understand that in order to think about the jobs of the future, we have to get elbow to elbow with the frontline worker and understand how are things changing and then respond to it. I joke that the learning and development team in organizations who have never performed the task are not always the best people of tomorrow to be the ones telling us how a job should be performed. So it means we have to listen more. It means we have to leverage technology that moves quicker. I think if we do those things, we put ourselves in a position to build a relationship where, automation and robots are going to create a safer workforce and a more productive one simultaneously.
Sam Caucci, the founder and CEO of 1HUDDLE, thanks very much. Absolutely fascinating. Wish you guys luck and look forward to seeing you as a much more household name.
Thank you. My pleasure.